Hello? Hello?
Podcast Network Asia.
God performs big things involving mountains. Is it because it's closer to him because he's in heaven?
Okay, Jesus is the one he's the one that's telling all about the signs of the second coming in Matthew 24. In verses 16 and 17, he says, when you see the abomination, right, spoken of in the prophet Daniel, when you see this abomination standing in the holy place, flee to the mountain. But it doesn't say which one in Matthew 24, right?
Because they were only...
Yeah.
Because what if we flee to the wrong mountain?
Exactly. One of the best verses, if you guys want a really good verse to just really hit it home, it's Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22 and 23. It says, you have come to Zion, the holy mountain, the church of God.
Ooh, the church, because it's a church. We just said mountain is a church. Okay, guys, before we get into this Road to Revelation series, I wanted you to help me immortalize a really big moment in my life just before we get things started, okay? I don't think this moment will happen in my life anytime soon, again. But I have a durian in my apartment.
You're supposed to share that with me. Hinog na? Is it ripe already?
It kind of smells like it's getting there.
I was going to say, those are the ones, right? Yeah.
Instructor Aaron, have you had durian ever?
Oh, yeah. When we were in the Philippines, actually, one of the hotels that we stayed at, that was one of the rules. They made us sign a paper that said we weren't allowed to bring in those fruits.
That's right. I just, because again, I don't know when I'm going to have just a whole durian in my apartment. It is in my room.
I'm taking a picture because I'm sending it to my mom that I have proof that durian's coming our way.
Do it
It's
now.
like a weapon.
Okay, got it.
The answer to that question, Sam, is never again. Never again after this one time.
No. You know what? I love durian. Do you guys like durian? It's an acquired taste, obviously, but do you guys like it? Because I love it. And that is why I am.
It's good. It's really good, actually. Yeah.
Look at the foreigners here
No.
about the durian.
I've had durian candy just to clear the air, but the actual
candy. Oh, that is what it was. Durian candy. Really?
Sarap.
Come on now.
Sarap yung candy.
But
I can vouch for the candy. +1.
Instructor Aaron, what's the closest thing like that? What fruit does durian taste like? What other fruit?
To be honest, I don't think that there's anything like it.
It's
unique. That's why it's one of those. It's just so unique. And like she said, it's acquired taste, but I guess because I grew up eating a lot of different kinds of random things, a lot of different random foods from different cultures. So I'm pretty lucky when it comes to that. I can go to different places. I won't starve, which is a good thing, right? I'm willing to try almost everything. I even had the balut when I was in in the
Philippines.
Look at you.
That was interesting. Yeah.
What is the most interesting food you've had?
Me personally? Well, it's kind of common now, but when I first ate it, it wasn't common. But kimchi was one of the strangest food.
Represent.
Because who is fermented cabbage, smells just horrific if you don't know what it is, and and so that was definitely one of the weirdest ones. And now it's something I mean, you crave it, and when you don't have it, if you're in a place where you can't get it, it's kind of like torture, Oh
my gosh! So we talked about kimchi. Instructor Aaron is in Korea. Ricky is part Korean. Just FYI, Instructor Aaron. Tina makes her own kimchi, and I am Korean. I don't know.
And Sam just sent me kimchi.
That's right. No, wait, I sent you what was it like pickled sesame leaves or something? Did I send you kimchi?
No, it's called perilla kimchi. So it's like a kind of kimchi.
Sure. Oh, look at this kimchi connection right here. Right. Yes.
Coincidence? I think not.
I think not. All right. So with this episode, we are officially jumping back on the road to Revelation. If you guys have been away, we did a couple of episodes just to kind of ease ourselves back into it. We have, of course, Instructor Aaron Russo, who is the instructor over at New Heaven and New Earth Shincheonji Church of Jesus, and our good friend. I think you may be, Ricky, the guest that has been back the most times on the show. Yeah, this being
Wow.
your third time on the show. Yes. Ricky Flores
Mhm.
Reyes, mother of 3 children, mother of 3 podcasts, The Weak Sauce,
Mhm.
mother of Fact, and Saved. We, of course, know her as RikiFlo. Welcome back, Ricky.
Hey, so happy to be back, guys. So happy to be back. Thanks for
We
having me.
love
again.
having you back. We love
We
having you
do.
back.
Yeah. But I mean, you've been busy though, because 3 podcasts, all different kinds of topics, by the way. I mean, one
Oh, my.
is, about motherhood,
Mm.
obviously, mother of fact. The other
Yeah.
one, the weak sauce, is just, whatever is in the news, big into politics now with elections
Mhm.
coming up very soon.
Mhm.
And then,
Mhm.
of course, you have Saved, which is your Bible podcast. I mean, how are you holding this all together?
Um, I think it's fun that they're all really different, and so I like the ideas don't have to compete so much. Like if I have a thought, then if I write it down, I'll know that this one is for motherhood, and of course, if I have a really strong partner in Tin on the weak sauce,
Right.
that takes a little bit of the load off of my shoulder also. And then Saved, of course, that those are just reflections that I have, Bible related also, so that's totally different. So I think it's pretty easy if you have the equipment, anyone can do it.
Instructor Erin, I highly recommend Save because she has the most soothing voice ever.
Oh my, no. Okay, I kid you not. That was exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say your best equipment is your voice.
Yeah.
And your writing skills, because you're a terrific writer. When you intro your episodes, I'm just like, this girl is so smart. And I love her diction. It's not even just her voice. It's like your diction. I could listen to you all day.
RikiFlo fans
not-
here.
Yeah. We got a little,
Turning
we got a
she's getting a little
RikiFlo
blush.
fan
Oh,
club.
okay.
She is though.
You see it.
She is.
I wasn't prepared for this.
And you're into Bible, which is what we're deep into right now. You're kind of familiar with what's going on over at New Heaven and New Earth, right? We are, I mean, this series is about discerning the testimony that they are sharing online on the book of Revelation, how would it be correct to say it has fulfilled or is fulfilling, Instructor Erin?
In process still. I mean, it would be
process.
because to be honest, I mean, it's a long process. There's still like if you want to go all the way to the end, there's 1,000 years of particular moment that has to happen and things that happen after that. So yeah, it's in process, but it's deep in process. I'll put it that way. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, speaking of 1,000 years, remember, Rix, the last time you were here, we were talking about this whole like millennialism or whatever.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Is that possible at all for us to kind of touch on the 1,000 years thing that we find in the book of Revelation? What is that about, Instructor Erin?
Oh, me? Okay, so there's a moment when things are going to start to be fulfilled, right? So I'm going back to the beginning. So things are going to start to be, just imagine it just like the time of the first coming. There's like a ramp up period, if you will, of God beginning to put things in motion. So things are written out as almost like a play, if you will. Okay, it's like a play. So when you have a screenplay or something like that, you already write out the script, but now what do you have to do? You have to get all the people, put them in the right positions, set up everything, and then you can actually, get things moving. So as things were starting, there's, if you think about the time of the first coming, it would be like John the Baptist, that comes. But even before that, all the people that are in the bad position, the Pharisees, the scribes, the teachers of the law, all of those things all kind of being in a position. And then God, when he starts to fulfill it, all those things are set up so that the prophecies can all be fulfilled in that generation. So all the prophecies that were spoken of about Jesus coming, that could be, it was thousands of years, actually, if you go all the way back to Genesis, but, all the prophets, 700 years before, 1,000 years before, and then they're all fulfilled within one generation, right? When John the Baptist is born, when he actually baptizes Jesus, and then Jesus begins to fill all of his portion, including all the way up to the cross, the death, the resurrection, ascension into heaven. Same process goes on in the time of Revelation. So for 2,000 years, things are, ramping up, if you will. There's a period that has to happen. And then when God begins to fulfill it, everything is set into motion. Now, the 1,000 years, there has to be things that must fulfill first. And then the 1,000-year period begins. That's when, like, there's a verse in Revelation chapter 12, verse 10, it says, now has come the power, the salvation, the kingdom of our Lord. So the fact that it says now means that before it didn't, right? And then now it is. So this is like a moment in time when something changes, like God's kingdom is actually established. That begins the 1,000-year period. Once God's kingdom is established for 1,000 years, this is the time when it's referred to as Satan being captured. He's being bound by a chain, if you will. Revelation chapter 20, verse 2. And he's bound for 1,000 years. During that 1,000-year process, this is when the world is being healed and cleansed of all of the impurities that Satan has been basically tainting the world for 6,000 years. So it takes 1,000 years to start to bring it back into the creation of God. But then after the 1,000 years, Satan is released once again. Now there's a purpose for that too, but I'll leave that for another time. There's a purpose as to why, because people will be like, why in the world would he do that? Why would God, release Satan again? It doesn't make any sense. But there's a purpose for that. And then after the 1,000 years, that's when everything that is not of God no longer exists, and only God and God's kingdom and God's people are, within God and being with God. So that's the 1,000 years. But what happens during, and there's a lot of different ideas as to what people have. So
the 1,000-year is a good period.
It doesn't start out good. It starts out just like the time of the first coming, where it's really difficult, right? There's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of persecution that happens, a lot of hardships, because Satan doesn't just give up, right? He's going to continue to fight all the way until the very end. This is just what he's done for 6,000 years. But eventually imagine like going from winter into the spring. It doesn't just one day all of a sudden become warm. It's like it slowly starts to turn into the spring. Things start to become more and more beautiful. That's kind of how you want to think about, the beginning of the process anyway. And then it's like a train. It starts getting faster and faster. And greater and greater.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're doing here on the Road to Revelation series is we are breaking down the parables. That's the stage that we are in, because according to the understanding of New Heaven and New Earth of the book of Revelation, it is written in parables or figurative language. And so unless you break that down, you can't understand the book. And again, the book of Revelation is a book of prophecy. When it starts fulfilling, then it signals the time of second coming and all that good stuff. So, again, because New Heaven and New Earth, Shincheonji Church of Jesus is the church that has the testimony. We are discerning that, but this is an open invitation to any of the churches who want to jump in this conversation and just break things down with us. Totally cool with that. Riki over here, because she's been on one of these episodes before. I think when you were here, we did blind, deaf, and clothes.
Yeah.
And so since you've been here, because I was following the online seminar, I was like, Rix, can you please watch this? And tell me what you think.
Yeah,
and
I know.
Yeah. So, but I mean, and it's a lot. Like we said, you're taking care of 3 children. You're doing 3 podcasts. You're a wife. You have a household to run. I mean, obviously you're a very busy person. And so, I'm not expecting that you would have followed the entire thing, but with what you've heard so far, where are you? Maybe you have some questions for Instructor Aaron. This would be a good time.
Okay, so Instructor Aaron, one of the things that has hindered me from following through is I wanted to ask, what does the Vatican think about all of this?
Like the Pope himself?
Have they gotten wind of what the New Heaven and New Earth Church has to say?
To be honest, I don't know exactly what they think or what they have heard. I would be surprised if they haven't heard something, just simply because the Pope has visited Korea, where this is, and it's been a kind of a controversial thing, especially with COVID, that all that stuff with COVID. The name Shincheonji kind of became synonymous with that, which has all been proven false since that time. But it did make it kind of a household name. I mean, there was even news in America. I was pretty surprised actually to see it when I was in America and such like that.
It's actually how I found out about Shincheonji, because they were all, the church was all over the news because there was an outbreak that happened in one of your churches, right?
In the church. church.
Yes.
Yeah, it was
And,
crazy. And it's only because it happened so quickly in the beginning. I mean, now the amount of people that actually were, that came down with the illness would be almost nothing. It's like, it'd be like some small town as opposed to, you know what I mean? Like it wouldn't even make news at this point because of how, vast this thing has become over the years. But there was a lot of political influence that had to do with it as well. I mean, if we go down that road, it's going to be a pretty interesting conversation. Maybe we can, get into that at some point too. But as far as the Vatican or, even the Catholic faith itself, I do know here in Korea, they do know about it quite well. So if they've actually reported back to the Vatican, which they do, usually they report back all the things that are happening. I would be surprised if they don't know anything. Now, whether or not they're taking anything serious, at this point, it's not as loud as, some people want it to be. But you got to think about it in the very same way as the time of the first coming. When Jesus first started his ministry, nobody knew about this guy, right? He was a nobody. He just kind of wandered around, had only a couple people following him from time to time. I mean, even his birth itself was just completely unknown. So it's definitely something that now this year, I would say, is probably the loudest year that it's been in, we're on year 39 of when it actually was established. This year would be the year that is making the loudest, as we're calling, trumpet call, if you will, being online, being translated in multiple different languages. This is the first time that it's ever happened, not only for us, for Shincheonji, but actually in the history of, religion, the first time that, a testimony like this has been proclaimed in this way. So it's pretty interesting. So I'm actually curious to find out. I'm curious to see how people are going to take it. It's an open invitation to all the pastors of the world, any and all that want to listen. So
yeah, because you do a Bible podcast, you're Catholic. And so does the second coming come up very often in your Bible conversations?
Parang no.
Right?
In fact, it's almost taboo to talk about because
Why is that?
right.
Because people think that it has like death and a
Scary.
rapture and like
Oo.
a giant hand like swooping all of the evil ones and just like throwing them in a fiery pit. Alam mo yon? That's why people are like, oh my God, second coming, scary, revelation, scary.
Right.
And
True.
it's not until you talk to scholars and people like Instructor Aaron that you realize that there really is nothing to be scared of, and that's when the conversation starts about what it could mean. That's when you get other people to start studying it and talking about it. So yeah, maybe we just need to keep talking about it.
Oh, I was just going to say, for the last, if you want to go to 2000 years, I guess it's been a book that kind of has been used to, just as you get fear, a lot of fear that's there. So people have used it for that purpose, but not really for understanding, because it's been too difficult to understand. So there's even certain denominations that they have a lot of commentary books on the different things of the Gospels or the Old Testament, but not on Revelation, because it's, again, just too out there for a lot of people. It's not something that even a lot of, they'll say, well, I don't want to think about it. We don't have to think about it. Right? It's not something that we have to think about. And for 2000 years, maybe that's kind of the case, because it was, well, our take on it is this, okay? As far as Shincheonji goes, our take on it is this. The revelation itself is a mystery, right? I mean, that's not hard to understand, right? It's a mystery. There's even the word mystery inside of Revelation, 3-4 times. But it's not, because it's a mystery, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't want to know it, but because people have never understood it, it kind of got put on the wayside for a long time. And people have tried to figure it out. There are certain people that have tried to figure it out, but the reason that we're not supposed to try to figure it out is because God is the one who actually sealed it. So he says in Revelation 5, there's a sealed scroll inside of his hand, right? It's a sealed scroll. It's sealed with 7 seals, this type of thing. And if you want to understand more about that sealed scroll, the same thing is said in the Old Testament as well. In the book of Isaiah and Isaiah 29, there's a sealed scroll. It's a vision. And that vision is concerning God's people. And it actually has a lot of the same similarities. There's a lot of like destruction that happens. Salvation is there too, though, right? There's a lot of this same kind of thing that happens in Isaiah too. But God says that no one that reads it is going to understand it. They're just not going to be able to, because he sealed it. He covered their heads. But when Jesus came, he was the one who could understand it, because he had the fulfillment. So he was testifying to the fulfillment. So he had what's referred to as the open scroll. And the same thing is happening in the time of Revelation. So Revelation itself has been sealed in what's called figurative language or parables, right? That's why you have all these fantastical, crazy, random things that are written in there. God uses the things of the Old Testament, the first coming, things like this. You have mountains that are destroyed, which we're going to talk about a little bit today, right? You've got beasts coming out of seas and all these kind of really crazy things that happen. But when God actually is allowing it to be opened, then people will be able to understand. And when you look at Revelation chapter 5, it says no one in heaven, on earth, or under the earth was allowed to look inside it. Nobody could understand it. So that's the only way that people could live their lives of faith for the last 2,000 years. You lived it just according to the teachings of Jesus, right? We all grew up in the churches of Christ, whether it was, Catholicism, Protestantism, and then it branches off to many different things from that. It goes from there. But then when Revelation begins to be fulfilled, that's when we're saying that a generation changes. Just like from the time before Jesus came to the time after he came, there's a huge shift. There's a huge change in faith. Same thing that's happening today. So all the people that have been living their lives just as a Christian, now in this particular generation, there is a new understanding that is coming as a result of that truth being known, right? As that truth being known. So now Revelation can actually be understood. Now that's a fantastical statement, right? So that's what she's saying. That's what needs to be verified by actually listening to it and then going, okay, well, let's see if that actually, really does match up with the scriptures.
Right. Are you taking down notes, Rex? Is that what you're doing?
I see she's holding a pen. See, hey.
Wow.
So it's kind
No,
of like
that's great.
saying, Instructor Aaron, that because like before I started studying it, I thought the revelation was like, end of the world now, guys. So it's just more of like an end of a generation.
But there is some destruction that does take place as well. There is actual destruction that does take place, but it's not on the scale that people have always assumed, because it talks about the sun, moon, and stars going dark, falling. It talks about every island and mountain being removed from its place, the skies receding like a scroll, hail and fire, like just complete destruction. But actually what God's talking about is a spiritual destruction of his people because of their betrayal. But there is physical destruction that does take place. There is certain things that do happen. There is certain like physical buildings that actually exist because a person, when they gather together, there has to be a place that they gather. So, but then to understand that, you really have to, listen to the actual teachings and say, oh, okay, that's that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, so the stance of New Heaven and New Earth is that this understanding, this book that has been closed and sealed for like 2,000 years, is now finally open. And the understanding of the book is given to somebody who is chosen. And I think for people living in 2022, that's kind of hard to grasp or accept because, I was thinking about this, but the thing is, when you look at the Bible, that is how God works all the time. Like he will always choose somebody, right? And so I guess while the idea of someone being chosen to be given an understanding, and again, there are many people who claim this, that's also probably part of the problem. But I think that is how it has to happen. And because, seeing the track record of God in the Bible, at least, and I think Revelation chapter 1 kind of lays that out too. Like there is someone who is chosen in that chapter of the book. And I guess I'm coming from a place of like having heard Chairman Lee, in the seminars that he's done, because he's always talking about how, I never went to theology school. I'm not even a pastor. Like I am nothing.
Yeah.
I'm a farmer. And again, many people have said that, but I think it has to be like that because God will always choose somebody who is, not
So popular,
what you're
you mean?
expecting, like not what you're expecting, like people have to hear this and say like, okay, there is no way a human being figured this out on his own. This has to be coming from God because so that no one could boast. I think there's a line like that.
Yeah, he set up, actually that's in Corinthians. It says that he chooses the lowly things, right? So that, to shame the wise so nobody can boast. God has done such an amazing job of making it where there's enough evidence. If you really listen, there's enough evidence to believe it. And the way that he did that was, by keeping it secret, because what Satan does, he mimics God's work. Okay, you can see this over and over again in 2 Corinthians 11, right? He talks about how Satan masquerades as an angel of light, and his apostles masquerade as apostles of Christ. So they pretend, right? And this is what Satan's always done. He pretends, because he can't be honest, right? He can't say, hey, I'm Satan. It's not like the movies where he comes in with a, contract here, sign this, right? Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's actually, what's funny is Jesus is the one that has the pitchfork, but we'll get into that. If you want to know about that, I'll throw that one at you. It's really kind of funny, but his winnowing fork, as it says. But the thing is because Satan mimics God's work, that's why God kept it secret. Because if he allowed it to be known before the proper time, then Satan would just mimic it, and then it would be confusing for everybody. What's the right one, right? All the knockoffs, right? So all these people trying to claim what they claim, because you said there's a lot that do, they do. But when the real thing comes, have you guys ever read like the books of Narnia or things like that?
I have not.
Okay.
See the
I'm
movie.
embarrassed to say.
Yeah, there's a part in there where there's a lion's skin, and they put it on, I think they put it on the donkey. And the thing is, in the book, it's really interesting. It says, if you've ever seen a lion, you'd never be fooled. But people that have never seen a lion, they believed he was an actual lion. It's the same thing. If you've never seen the truth, the lie is easy to accept. But when the real truth comes, that's so perfect. It's so perfect from Genesis all the way through. Everything fits so perfectly. It makes everything else pale in comparison. So when God finally does reveal it, and this person says, hey, I'm such and such, of course, your first response is going to be like, yeah, right. I mean, that's crazy. Who wouldn't? I mean, of course. But then if you listen, and just like you said, somebody who's unschooled, who's never been taught to study about the Bible, he didn't go to school or to churches when he was growing up, and then to receive this truth and to be able to testify it as clearly as he does, as perfect. And not just that, but the actual testimony, the actual fulfillment, being able to testify the locations, the places, the people, the names, everything. Then you can start to see, okay, wait. And now that God has allowed it to be open, right? He kept it, sealed for that purpose. And then when it's revealed, Satan can't do anything about it except try to do what he always does, which is, persecute it, just like they did in the first coming. So that's really his only weapon that he has left over, to try to make it look, something that it's not.
Right.
So, yeah, it's really interesting though. It's really interesting.
And I know that in Korea, you guys are definitely on the receiving end of a lot of persecution, right?
Yeah, it's there. It's there. It's there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Rix, any other questions before we jump into Mountain, our parable?
Oh, let's do it. Let's climb that mountain.
Okay, let us go. Mountain. Our parable for today is Mountain.
Mountains, it's something that's all through the Bible, right? I mean, the mountain shows up everywhere, even in the very beginning. The Korean Bible, actually, it's kind of interesting because it says, what is it? Eden Dongsan. It's Mount Eden.
Okay.
Right?
You
Mount
said
Eden.
Oh yeah. Like a little small mountain.
Right?
Yeah.
So a lot of God's work has been done on mountains. So you think about all the things that happened, the ark landing on Mount Ararat and things like that, Moses being in Mount Oreb or Mount Moriah when he's meeting with God in different places. Jesus praying on the Mount of Olives. So mountain is something that's actually just in the scriptures a lot. It's in the scriptures a lot. So it's because there's so many things about mountain, to understand it, it's really important. Is it talking about a physical one, or is it talking about a spiritual one? Because when you get into, as we talked about, all that massive destruction that takes place inside of Revelation, when you go to Revelation 6, that's what it's talking about. Like all the mountains and islands, it says all the mountains and islands are removed from its place. Like that's a huge destruction if you think about it in a literal sense, right? Or in Revelation 8, a giant mountain is thrown into the sea. It's really crazy stuff. And then of course you have, Revelation 14, where the most important mountain shows up. So, but I wanted to add, like, if you guys had any like previous thoughts or what you guys have heard about mountains and what you guys think about that kind of thing.
Oh, I do have a question. Pre-revelation, like let's not even talk about Revelation first. Like, how you said that God performs like big, like big things involving mountains? Is it because it's closer to him because he's in heaven? That's what I used to think. Like when he gave the commandments to Moses, I think it was just easier for him to like, hey, we're halfway. Let's meet there.
Easier.
I just think because I mean, like growing up, I mean, God's in heaven is what I was like told.
Right.
So I'm like just thinking, okay, it's easier. Let's just meet at some mountain that's halfway.
Meet halfway.
Well, think about
He
think
would
about what you're saying,
literally
like-
just drop a line.
Right.
yeah, right. Just
Drop a line.
if you think about what you're saying, it's in a physical sense, it's higher, right? It's the high places of
Yeah.
earth. So it's even in the Bible, it's called the high places of earth. And when God is mad, like there's a time that he's mad and he's actually he's gonna tread the high places of earth. It says he's gonna destroy the high places. But then take that to a spiritual side, because we know that God's not literally floating around, up in space. But when we say he's higher, it's like a spiritual, spiritual higher. So think about it in like in a sense of a business. When you have a boss, right? They're above you, right? They can be on the same floor, they can have an office right next to you, but in the structure or the hierarchy, they're above you. And if you get fired, you get, taken down from your position, if you think about it in that way. God is the same thing. Isaiah 55 is one of my favorite verses to help people kind of, understand this a little bit. If you look at verses 8 and 9, it says that God's ways are higher than our ways, right? They're not literally higher, but they're spiritually above. The intelligence, the knowledge, the wisdom is greater than anything that man can think of. So when you think about God in that same way, and you talked about mountains being like physically high, well, it's the same thing. Because a spiritual mountain, just to throw it out there, well, a spiritual mountain, if you think about a physical one first, it's a place with got a lot of dirt, right? Rocks, trees, animals, very, very high, right? Very, very high place. And then when you take that spiritually, you guys have gone through a lot of the spiritual language. So you think about trees, rocks, animals, right? The grass, it refers to, and even the dirt, right? Even the dirt, it says that I too have been taken from the clay, right? Paul says that you are God's field. Jesus says that your heart is like a certain type of soil. So people, if you gather a large amount of people together, they're like a large amount of dirt, animals, trees, right? All the spiritual things. And if they're God's people, right? If you're gathering a lot of God's people together, where do we gather for God? We gather in a church. So a mountain, a spiritual mountain in the scriptures is referring to a gathering of God's people that can be referred to as a church. And it's supposed to be a spiritually higher place than the rest of the world, right? Than the rest of the world.
So this seems to be a formula for the parables, right? We always start out with the physical characteristics of something. So in this case, mountain, it's high, it's a place where all of these things are gathered, and then it forms this mound, big mound, it's called a mountain, right? And then we take those physical characteristics and use that now to express something spiritual in the scriptures. At least that's what God does, is the formula, right?
And that's not unknown in the scriptures either. There's a lot of places where it was already, like, for example, if you look at Psalms chapter 68, it's really kind of a funny one. I always make fun of this one. Psalm 68:16, it says, "Why do you gaze in envy, O rugged mountains, at the mountain God has chosen?" Why do you gaze in, what mountains don't gaze in envy? Like what they don't, it's just dirt, right? It doesn't, but what does envy? People do, right? People envy. So God's been using mountains to describe his people for a long time, but he hides it to, there's one thing knowing what a mountain is, there's another knowing how God's using it, right? How is he using it to fulfill his kingdom, or which mountain is it, right? That's the other thing, because there's different types of mountains when you get into, Revelation as well. So it's really,
that really famous one, faith can move mountains. That's a Bible verse, right?
Yeah.
And I think as I was thinking about today's recording, I was like, the mountain that the Bible is talking about that can be moved by faith, like, is that a physical mountain or a spiritual mountain? Which one is it?
Well, I'm not going to take anything away from God, right? I mean, he can do whatever he wants, right? He can move anything he wants, right? But in that case, it's like you go back to the basic figurative language. What's the seed, right? When it says the faith is small as a mustard seed, the seed itself is God's word.
The word, yeah.
Yeah. And if a mountain, okay, this is where you have to get into what types of mountains there are. There's physical, obviously, but when you get into spiritual, there's 3 different types of spiritual mountains. There's ones that are referred to as mountains of betrayal. It sounds kind of funny, but mountains of betrayal, meaning that they were a church or a group of people, they belonged to God, but what did they do? They betrayed. So they no longer belong to God, right? They have moved. And that's why in certain scriptures, it says, the mountains have become our possession. It's not like Satan wants the mountains. He doesn't care about that, but definitely God's people. So you have mountains of betrayal, and then you have mountains which are called mountains of destruction. Now you can think about a volcano maybe, right? Or something like that, but that's again, not what it's getting into. Jeremiah 51, God is mad at this particular mountain. He says, I am against you, O destroying mountain. And he refers to it as Babylon. So you have these mountains or these people, right? This group of people that are doing what? They're destroying God's people, right? So when you talk about that faith that'll move mountains, I think that's in, what is it? That's in like Matthew 7. There's one in 17, Matthew 17. I think another one, Matthew 21. 21. I always remember that.
Nerd.
I'm a Bible thumper.
Okay.
I'm a nerd.
I was gonna say, do you think you win Jeopardy like the Bible?
But if you think about it like a church, right? If you think about it like a church, if God's word, let's say there's a church of people that really want to be with God, right? They're dedicated. They have a hungry heart. They're so hungry and thirsty for the word, but they just don't have it. They don't have the absolute truth yet because God didn't allow it to be open. But now, wow, it's opened. And now the testimony's coming. So now if you have that word of truth, what can you do? You can go to a person, a church, you can go to a town, whatever, and you can testify that. And if they listen, then they're leaving the place of darkness and they're coming to a place of light, just like it, Apostle Paul says it like that. And I think it's Acts 26, where he says to preach and have people cross over from the place of darkness to the, place of light. So that's like moving a mountain.
Oh, okay. Definitely.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Because if you move especially the pastor's heart, this is why we're so like reaching out and just begging pastors themselves to just listen. It's that should be the thing that they should want to do the most. I mean, pastors should have that really hungry heart, right? They're really hungry and thirsty heart. And if the pastor themselves realizes that this is the truth, right? Let's, say they listen to it and they're like, wait, okay, wow, this really is something special. Well, their congregation is going to listen to them, right? We've been accused in the past of wanting to like steal all these, people from that's one of the things they always were saying is that we're trying to steal congregation. That's not true at all. We're actually we're trying to do exactly what you just mentioned, move mountains, right? Because they don't belong to us or anything. We're trying to just give them to God. So the chairman's been saying, if you want, at this point, we'll give you everything. We'll give you all the materials. We'll give you all the instructor that you want, everything. We'll just give it to you. All you have to do is just agree that you'll, join and become one. That's pretty much it. Yeah.
I would imagine that doesn't go over very well all the time.
No.
Right.
No. And unfortunately, it was the same in the time of the, first coming as well. It was the leaders of God's people that really had the hardest time, wanting to listen to Jesus, unfortunately. Yeah.
I guess what's surprising to me is like, if this is indeed the second coming, right? Because I think I guess the last way that I thought it was going to happen was through a new teaching. It's almost like it's kind of lame almost to what I was expecting. You know what I mean? Because, when I think of second coming, like what Ricky was saying earlier, like it's scary. There's natural disasters and just craziness happening, physical craziness, chaos, and all that. I just wasn't thinking that it was going to be a new teaching or like a full understanding of something. Like that's the second coming. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. There's a verse that I really enjoy. It's I think it's Zechariah 4:10. Is that who despises the day of small things? It's because that's how God actually, that's how he fulfills his work. A lot of the times it's really small. If you think about the birth of Christ or who he was, they were expecting a big, giant, mighty king. They were expecting a lot of the same thing. That's why they didn't accept him, because he wasn't what they wanted. They wanted the same
Yeah.
thing. And now we have all these amazing Hollywood movies, right? Really cool Hollywood movies. And all these big giant books that have come out that talk about, this massive destruction that's meant to take place. But then when it's actually fulfilled, I mean, it's really kind of weird. I mean, God chooses, as you pointed this out, I think in one of the last ones we were talking about, one of the smallest countries in the world, right? And one of the smallest little towns that really was nothing at the time, chooses somebody who has no reason and no ability to be able to do what he's doing. And then through that, he's creating his entire kingdom. It's that in and of itself, even with nothing else, almost can give some proof as to the, what's behind it, right? That it's not just some physical thing, but there's something happening here. There's something really quite spiritual that's happening.
If I were to say, Instructor Aaron, okay, so I think I'm leaning towards the NHNE teaching. Let me go listen to the Revelation series of Chairman Lee. What happens to the commentaries? Do I just totally set that aside? Or, I mean, eventually I think I should be able to distinguish, right?
Yeah, definitely distinguish. That's a big one. It's not to say that every single thing that is said is a lie, because that would be too easy, right? I mean, that just, if Satan, all he did was just have a complete 100% lie, that would be so simple for people to be able to discern and distinguish. So instead, it's a mixed understanding. If you go all the way back to the beginning, what he said to Eve, right, in the Garden of Eden, did God really say this? Like, he knew exactly what God said, but he was just twisting that a little bit. Or when he's battling against Jesus in Matthew chapter 4, right? When he's battling Jesus, he's like, using the scriptures themselves to kind of twist a little bit. And
I was going to say, I knew what happened in Matthew 4. I really don't. I have to look it up later.
So in Matthew 4, like when Jesus is taken out to the desert and, the devil's using certain scriptures, like it said that if you fall, you will not even hurt your, the angels will attend to you. They will not even hurt. But Jesus, he's using the scriptures, just twisting them a little bit. So what happens is when the absolute truth is made known, there's something called like mixed teachings, mixed wine, or even what's referred to in Isaiah as like your silver has become dross, your choice wine is diluted with water. So it has purity there, but now it's just mixed. It's that tree of good and evil, if you will. So instead, when the absolute truth is made known, what can you do? Now you can discern. So when you learn the absolute truth and then you read something else, you can say, okay, well, this I know is according to the scriptures, but this is something that's not. And so in the Bible, it talks about it as everything that is not of God will be burned away, right? It'll be removed and then made pure. So the pure teaching makes it where everything else can be discerned. And that's really what we're meant to do in verses like, Hebrews 5 and 6. It says that we have to be mature believers that can distinguish between, good and evil. We have to be able to be mature, but to do that, you have to learn it, hear it, understand it, and then you can start to discern. So it is a process. There is a bit of a process because it's knowledge. I mean, just like any knowledge, you really have to learn it, right?
Yeah. And I would really like to learn. No, really. I mean, the Bible is the word of God, right? It has to be the authority on how we live out this faith. Okay, Ricky, you've been pretty quiet. What are you thinking? And do you have any questions?
So I'm just like taking everything in, really, about the mountains being people, possibly like figures of authority. I don't know.
Well, you brought up a good little point right there, the figures of authority. Because in like Revelation 17 is a really crazy one. It's a really crazy chapter. And it talks about the 7 heads of the beast. And the 7 heads are referred to as 7 mountains as well. So the 7 heads are 7 mountains. And when you look at other scriptures, it talks about how a head is like a leader. So these 7 heads are 7 leaders, and they're like mountains, meaning that they're leaders of a church. So there was these 7 particular people, because that's what they were. There's 7 particular people that each one of them was a leader of a particular denomination of a church, and they belong to a particular organization. And they're the ones that actually came in as the destroying mountain to destroy inside of Revelation. So you're right there by saying that it is, they're like authority figures too, you know, these, because they represent that church, right? And as they get together as one big beast. So you can imagine like two giant armies getting together, if you will, or something like that.
Yeah. So for somebody who hasn't read Revelations or who hasn't listened to the testimony of New Heaven and New Earth, the seven mountains that you speak of now, have they been revealed? Like, is that something that's revealed in the testimony?
Yes. It's a
Okay.
short answer. Yes.
Okay.
I know. Yeah. It actually, these things took place quite. So when, you know, Sam was asking like how much of Revelation is being fulfilled, like how far we're into it, those type of things have already taken place. So the first seven people, right, they're referred to as the seven stars. They were actually chosen, appeared, went through betrayal. The outside organizations came in and took over. They destroyed them. And then this is where the person who's referred to as the chairman, the one who overcomes, right? That's all the events that he witnessed. So he witnessed the betrayal, he witnessed the destruction, and that's why he can testify to it. So that's what we mean that there's a testimony, that these things, because what do you do when you're a witness, right? You can't testify to something you've never seen or never heard. So if you go to court, you're going to testify to what you have seen. That's why they call you as a witness. And this person was chosen strictly to be a witness. So again, I've always wanted to be very clear on this. He's not Jesus, right? He's not God. He's not the Spirit of truth. None of that. He is simply someone who was at that place and was chosen and said, these are the things that are happening. And this is why it's a part of Revelation. And now he can testify according to what he has seen and heard. And that's what, like Revelation 22 verse 8, it says, I, John, have seen and heard these things. Well, 2,000 years ago, that was Apostle John who saw them in a vision. But then when the vision's fulfilled, there has to be someone here. Someone has to see it, right? Someone has to testify. And that's just, it's that person. It's pretty, I know it's crazy to sound like, even when I say it, sometimes it sounds crazy to me.
Right?
You know?
even like the first time that I guested for the Revelation series, and I was drinking with some of my friends, and I was like, should I testify to what I just read? So I tried. I was like, okay, have you guys read Revelation? And it just like it became the strangest 15 minutes because I wasn't sure if they were into it, if they were buying it. I wasn't sure if I was saying it or selling it correctly. I was just like, never mind. I have to read more.
No,
that is so true. Yeah.
I will tell you that when you find people that want to listen, it's the most amazing thing to talk about. It's so much fun.
I agree.
It really is.
I agree.
Have you heard of anybody else who said that they actually also received it, or like the testimony from God?
You know, I think even that point of like claiming to be a witness is something that people differ on, because some people wouldn't even say that there is someone who's supposed to witness these events. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's just, we're opening the book and we're going to try and figure it out what this all means, you know? So, yeah.
So
There have been people in the past. There have been some people, but they don't. And this is the key. This is why you have to be able to know the prophecies. Because if they are testifying to something, but let's say you don't know what the prophecies are, then you could, you may listen because it may sound kind of interesting. There's a lot of people that have a lot of knowledge. You know, there's very wise people in the world and people that have read the Bible, 100 times, 200 times, whatever. And they may want to use it for their own purpose. They may even think that they are something. You never know. I mean, I can never discount Satan. He's there all the time. And he is always going to try to do whatever he can to hinder the work of God. And what's the best way to do that? I mean, Jesus himself said there's going to be a lot of false Christs, false messiahs, many people that are going to come claiming to be in, him, right? Coming in his name and things like that. So yeah, there's been a lot. And that's why I think he's done a really good job. Satan's done a really good job by putting that fear in the hearts of people.
Satan.
Yeah. He's put that fear. So even with when the moment that you hear something like that, you're like, no, right? And it's like, you know, I mean, it's the first thing. And I understand 100%. I understand.
Okay, I'm not sure if I want to get into that, but just to bring it back to like Ricky's point, because as I was hearing this stuff on the podcast, like sometimes I get really excited and I'm very curious about it. And I think maybe my friends would be into it. And so, I want to talk to them. I choose the ones who are like more religious and into Bible and stuff. But really, like once the word revelation comes up, like if you want to shut down a conversation, talk about revelation.
Let's talk Jesus.
So true, yeah.
I want to talk to you about
Wow.
Jesus, guys.
So this is kind of like the only place where I can be like, let's talk about this book. It is the most fascinating thing. Instructor Aaron, are you done with, the parable and anything else that you want to tell us about mountain in the Bible?
I think the most important reason why you need to understand mountain is because of Revelation 14. So well, first I'll take it. First, go to the Gospels. If you go to Matthew 24, okay, Jesus is the one he's the one that's telling all about the signs of the second coming in Matthew 24. Okay, it's called like mini revelation, signs of the second coming. His disciples come up and say, hey, when's all this going to happen? Right? Because he's talking about all this, things that are supposed to happen. They're like, well, when is this going to happen? What's going to be the signs? And one of them in verses 16 and 17, he says, when you see the abomination, right, spoken of in the prophet Daniel, when you see this abomination standing in the holy place, flee to the mountain. Right? So then you're like, okay, so we're supposed to see this kind of crazy stuff and then flee to a mountain, but it doesn't say which one in Matthew 24, right? Because they were only,
because what if we flee to the wrong mountain?
Exactly. So that's why Revelation is so important, because actually Revelation has the details. Matthew 24 and Revelation, they have to fit, because it's about the same second coming. It's not two different, things. So in Revelation, when we talk about the abomination that causes desolation, it's the beast. And that beast, as we said, it's these group of people and they enter into God's tabernacle. Well, if you go to 2 Thessalonians, okay, this is where the Antichrist, or that a lot of people talk about, it shows up. It says, when you see, what does it say? The man doomed to destruction, he will set himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. So this is one of the signs that it says. So when this group or organization enters into the tabernacle that's created at the time of Revelation and takes over, when you see that, you're supposed to, it says, those who have wisdom, right? Those who are wise understand what's happening. And then you're supposed to flee. You're not supposed to stay in that place because you're not going to win. So you have to flee to what's called the mountain. And the mountain you find in Revelation is Mount Zion, right? Mount Zion. But Mount Zion, the literal Mount Zion's in Jerusalem. So that means we'd all have to fly to the Jerusalem, right? And that kind of, it's actually not even a big mountain. It's like really small. It's like,
how are we going to fit?
Yeah, we wouldn't all fit. All billions of people wouldn't fit there, right? But then if you look at one of the best verses, if you guys want a really good verse to just really hit it home, it's Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22 and 23. It says, you have come to Zion, the holy mountain, the church of God.
Ooh, the church, because it's a church. We just said mountain is a church.
So Mount Zion in the time of the first coming, because Zion means light, it means truth. And Jesus was the light, Jesus was the truth. So Jesus and his disciples, they were that mountain of salvation, that Mount Zion in the time of the first coming. If you wanted to be with God, who did you have to go to? You had to go to Jesus, right? Where was the evil? It was inside of God's synagogues. They had already taken over, the Pharisees, the scribes. So instead, when you realized that, you left and you went to Jesus. I know, right? It's pretty cool. And then when you go into Revelation, so Mount Zion, and what we're saying, if you know the whole name of the church, our church, it's, Shincheonji, Church of Jesus, the Temple of the Tabernacle of the Testimony, and it's referred to as Zion, right? The Zion Theological, Center. So this is Mount Zion. Why? Because it's the place where the testimony is coming from, the place where the light is being shown, right? The truth is coming from Zion. And this is where God says that he will come. So if you look at Revelation 14, it says on Mount Zion, you're going to find Jesus, the Lamb. You're going to find those that have been gathered or harvested to Mount Zion, and you find God's throne, all on Mount Zion. Just as you said, you don't want to go to the wrong mountain, right? And that's why it's so important because the testimony is what leads you there. Like if you follow a stream, eventually you're going to find the source of the stream, right? You follow a beam of light, eventually you're going to find the source of that light. Same thing, when the testimony goes out, if you follow the testimony, where is it coming from? It eventually should take you to the source. And that's why we're, sending it out there.
Okay, so with that understanding then, is the message of Shincheonji that at this time of revelation, as Shincheonji stance is, that this is the church, that this is the church that everyone needs to be part of? Because it's the
Amen.
right. Yeah.
Amen. Yeah. That's the actual like reality that we are testifying, that Mount Zion has been created, because it says that if you look at Isaiah chapter 2, the end of Isaiah chapter 2, Isaiah 1 and 2, it's like a whole theme of betrayal, destruction, salvation, from Isaiah 1:1 to Isaiah 2:4. And in Isaiah 2, it talks about the mountain of the Lord will be established in the last days. So the mountain of the Lord will be established, meaning it doesn't exist before, it exists at that time. But all the mountains of the world, it's not like a new mountain's just gonna, pop up out of nowhere. And Mount Zion already exists physically. So the mountain has to be something that's created through the fulfillment of Revelation. And Shincheonji has been created through the fulfillment of Revelation. Yeah.
We had
Ricky?
some
I need a
really,
drink.
yeah, we had some really interesting facial expressions today. So I really hope you guys are watching this on YouTube. Although Spotify is also cool. Okay. Yeah, I guess that, we'll make it clear. Yeah, that is the message and invitation of New Heaven and New Earth, Shincheonji Church of Jesus. And I guess, yes, Ricky.
Okay, so if that's the message, does that mean that what happens if you choose to ignore after listening to the testimony? Like, what happens if you're not part of the Shincheonji Church?
You're going to the wrong mountain.
Yeah, that is something, right? That's something they have to talk about. And, unfortunately, that's why God is, I do believe this though. God is loving. God is forgiving. God is patient. God is kind. God is merciful. So I do believe that God is going to give as much opportunity as possible for people to listen and hear the truth again and again and again. You could be people like, if my wife was on here, she would testify. She had to listen to it 3 or 4 times before she was like, okay, this is definitely something that I believe in. It's not something that when people hear it the first time, not everybody just goes, okay, this is it, right? It's something that they have to really verify. They have to go through all the questions that they have. And right now it's hard, because think about it this way. When Jesus first came, how many people really followed him? Right? You had just a handful.
At least 12.
Yeah. And then you had
At
like
least.
a group. Yeah. Then you had a group in John 6 that left him, right? They didn't want to follow him anymore. And then in Acts 2, when the Pentecost happens, there's like 120. So just a minute, tiny little amount compared to the millions of people that were existing in, Judah, Jerusalem, and places like that. And he went all over that area. He went to his lost sheep. But then now look at it. There's like 2 billion, believers of Christ in the world, right? So when it first starts, it's really hard because it's new. People are afraid. It's not an easy thing to believe. But as it becomes more known and more understood and becomes just something that is a comfortable thing to hear, that's when it's called the great multitude. What happens in Revelation 7 is, in the beginning, there's very few that listen. And the very few that listen, it's not the miracles that they follow. God's not using miracles, right? He's not using wonders and signs. It's strictly the word. People that listen to the word and they go, this is it. This is the word. And they gather and they seal themselves with that word. And they become what's called the 144,000 kingdom and priests, the first fruits. But it doesn't end there. It doesn't end there. When all this right now, this massive tribulation we're going through, this is what we're saying. Part of this COVID-19, all this stuff, it's part of that tribulation. There's the physical, but there's also the spiritual that's going on in the world too. And out of this, the great multitude will come, is what it says, right? Revelation chapter 7, verse 9, out of the great tribulation. And it's so vast, you can't even, count the numbers. So over this next year, next year, whatever, however long it takes, God is going to gather all those people. But to be honest and blunt, if people refuse, really what can God do? Right? There has to be a time when only the things of God exist. Because otherwise the other option is that God just continues to allow evil to exist in the world. But then that has a lot to do with the after 1,000 years. So there is time. there is time, right? We're not doomsday, right? We're not doomsday, nothing like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are people, and I don't understand it, to be honest, coming from my own point of view, because of, of course, who I am. I'm biased. I believe in all this, but I don't understand why, if it does become that big and that understood, why people still wouldn't after that long period of time. But then I still don't understand why people don't believe in Jesus. So, yeah.
I would be very interested to see how this ages, because this is going to go online, and 2-3 years from now, we're going to dig up this recording again.
Ooh, yeah. Ooh,
right? Like, Instructor Aaron said these people are going to come out and blah, blah, blah. So, so we can look forward to that.
Yeah.
Wow.
But just like, I don't know, continuing on with with Ricky's question, because Instructor Aaron, you did say that if, we don't believe right away, then God, it seems like God is just going to continue to forgive us, right? Until we find our way back to the truth. I mean, speaking of point, when does that happen?
Well, unfortunately, Jesus was pretty clear about that too. If you look at like Luke 17, 26 to 30, he says the time of the second coming is going to be like the time of Noah and the time of Lot.
And Lot.
Yeah. So if you think about what happened at the time of Noah, Noah is preaching. He's called a righteous preacher. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 5, he's called a righteous preacher. So he was preaching. He was trying to tell the people, hey, a flood is coming. I'm building a boat. I'm not doing this for my own leisure, right? This is something that's happening. But if you look at how many people believe, not many, right? And what it actually says is that, I know, it's sad. It's actually sad. But what it says is that God's the one that shut the door. It wasn't Noah. Yeah.
Was that in the Bible?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then when you think about Sodom and Gomorrah, right? It's Lot and his wife and his daughters. They're the only ones that were able to get out. And Abraham was trying. He's like, please don't destroy it if there's like 50 people there that are righteous. And he's like, I won't. Okay, what about 20? What about 10? What about 5? But eventually only those that, and really Lot was really only saved because of Abraham, to be quite honest, because God loved Abraham. So he got his family out of there. So I really have a lot of hope for my family, right? That through the work that we're doing, hey, God's going to save my family too.
Hey, by osmosis. All right.
Right, exactly. But unfortunately, because of that, there is going to be some time when God says, enough is enough. So that's why there is that sense of urgency. And if you've ever listened to like the chairman, or if you've ever in the past, when we talked about like doing the work and getting it done, and even the lifestyle, we get persecuted a lot because a lot of us dedicate our lives to fulfilling this. Well, if you think about at the time of the first coming, there was a very limited time to do the work that Jesus was able to do. It was just a few years that he was on this earth, and then just a few years of their life that they had to spread this truth, right? And then they were all killed as well. It's the same thing today. We have to do it as quickly as possible because, again, Satan's not going to give up. And we want to save as many people in this generation as we possibly can. And then it's going to, continue on. But there is going to be a point when God says, enough is enough.
You guys took too long.
Pick a mountain, yeah. Start running, right?
Pick a mountain. Oh, that's hilarious. All right. Yeah.
This is something that maybe in the future we can talk about, because I know we're running long on time, but some people will ask me the question, what happens to people that have never heard this and they die tomorrow? Yes. Or what about the people that are living in a country or in like a small, village
really
or something
remote area?
Yeah. So that's something maybe we can talk about in the future, because we do have, an actual teaching about that as well. So, and it's a good one. It actually is a good one. Wow. So.
What a pro. We are putting a cliffhanger on there at the end of
Yeah.
this episode.
I saw how you ended the last episode. That was pretty crazy. What was that?
Okay. Wow. Thank you so much, Instructor Aaron, for
My pleasure.
yeah, walking us through or hiking with us up to the top of that mountain. And of
I'm in
course,
that mountain.
yes, RikiFlo. Ricky, we love you so much for joining us for these conversations. And we love having you here. And for all of you guys, if you want to check her many podcasts, there's the Week Sauce that she does with Tin. Please send our love to Tin too, by the way. We'd love to have her on the show sometime. Mother of Fact and Saved, all on Spotify. Instructor Aaron, you have it. What is this? Like it's called Healing Leaves. It's a channel on YouTube, which we linked down below. I checked it out because that was the first time we
I checked it out today too.
But what is that? Like, is that like your worship service?
It's not mine that I'm running, but I just I give some of the material that we're doing. So there's a lot of other people that are involved. They make little small videos and things like that. And then we have a mission church. It's like just an open online church that we invite people to, called New Heaven, New Earth. And it's just for people that want to come to, because right now not a lot of people can go to physical churches, or they're around the world. So we have some people that are in like different countries here in Korea, but also many different countries. And then we just have our little service. And then I just put that up there so that if anybody ever wants to, listen, they can do that. It's just a small little thing that we're doing for now, but I really enjoy it.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. The link is in the show description. Of course, Dog Behind the Human with Tina Ryan. Also on YouTube and Spotify, correct? Yes. If you guys want to get in touch with us, if you guys want us to discuss anything in this road to revelation, you can email us at narrowdoorpodcast@gmail.com. We thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
I got a mountain of laundry to fold.